going to be fun. Thank you so much. You know, since I've been with ALEC, each year has felt like the most important year to work with state leaders like you. Well, 2020 definitely takes the cake. Even while all the attention was on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue this election, I was amazed at the first week of November to watch one by one as voters rejected big government and instead voted for freedom and local control. People often forget the connection between our state capitals and the federal government, but recently they have shown a new awareness in response to COVID-19. We responded with a decentralized approach, and Americans watched how well it worked. America was built on local control and federalism, and voters are still choosing this today. It's what makes our work that much more important and that much more timelier. States are where the action is, and it's where policy is created. It truly reaches the people directly. Now, Americans are looking to their state leaders with hope that they will create solutions to do just that, reach them and give them the opportunity to build a better life. People's trust in local control is in part due to the amazing innovation that has happened in 2020. Whether it was the amazing work that you all did in the states, the government response to COVID, or small business entrepreneurship, everyone did their part. And just as the 50 governors got involved and innovated and managed through the unknown in 2020, so too did the American biopharmaceutical industry in the private sector. America's businesses have been working around the clock on innovation in biopharmaceutical research in our race to find the COVID-19 treatments and vaccines. Thank you to PHRMA for leading the country in innovative biopharmaceutical research at such a needed time. And thank you for being a part of today's session and bringing such an important conversation to ALEC. Joining us today to talk about the amazing biopharmaceutical innovation happening in the private sector is Lori Riley. She's the Chief Operating Officer of PHRMA. Lori, we're happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, and thank you to ALEC for having me today. I am very pleased to share the virtual stage today with Governor Abbott and Speaker Gunn, among many others. Governor Abbott, the industry is grateful for your leadership, especially during a year like we've had this year with COVID. Governors and legislators have been on the front line against COVID, and we really appreciate all of the efforts that you and other governors have done. Speaker Gunn, our team is very glad for your friendship and partnership, and just to offer a sincere congratulations to you on your efforts to effect historic change in Mississippi through the new state flag. This year has clearly been hard on all of us, and I want to commend all of the legislators listening today for the incredible leadership that you've shown to keep your citizens safe and healthy. We are especially grateful for the work we've done together to ensure that critical manufacturing of medicines was able to stay safely online. Thanks in part to these efforts, our industry has been able to make significant scientific advances in just a short time since the full genetic sequence of the novel coronavirus that can cause COVID-19 was released in January. Our industry has literally been working around the clock 24/7. We know the world is counting on us. In total today, there are over 1,600 clinical trials that are ongoing, and that includes trials for both vaccines and therapies. Across the US, hundreds of these clinical trials are underway, and I'm proud to say we're already seeing results. As I'm sure you all are aware, 2 companies have recently announced that their vaccine candidates are showing effectiveness at a 95% rate, which is truly amazing, and are now seeing approval at the Food and Drug Administration. And of course, we've also seen a number of treatments, such as monoclonal antibodies and remdesivir, that are being used to care for those that are already impacted with COVID-19. And the progress that we've made is really not by accident. It's due to a number of factors. First, our companies have deep scientific knowledge, and that knowledge has been gained from years of research and development into other viruses, whether it's MERS, SARS, influenza, hepatitis C, and HIV. The knowledge that our industry has gained from those viruses has dramatically improved our likelihood of success in identifying existing treatments for those that are impacted by COVID. Second, the industry has invested literally billions of dollars in technologies that have dramatically shortened the amount of time it takes to decode a virus and develop a potential vaccine. If you think back to SARS, which was around about a decade ago, it took 20 months to have a vaccine that was ready to test in patients. If you fast forward now to COVID, it took just a matter of a few months before we were able to have a vaccine or multiple vaccine candidates that were ready to be tested in patients. Companies have embraced strategies over the past year, such as conducting virtual clinical trials, conducting simultaneous clinical trials in multiple countries as well, with the hope of speeding up the time, I should say, it takes to bring a vaccine to patients. And companies are literally conducting parts of the development and manufacturing and regulatory review stages in parallel. That typically happens consecutively. But again, in order to hasten the development of these vaccines and treatments, companies are performing things across, at the same time. And our companies alone, I would say, have the unique capability, once a drug or vaccine is approved, to manufacture that medicine or vaccine at scale. Our industry today is expanding our unique manufacturing capabilities and ramping up production capacity. So we are prepared to supply not just the US, but the world when a vaccine or treatment is approved. And I should say, oftentimes companies are doing this at risk, meaning they are starting that manufacturing process well before they know whether or not that treatment or vaccine has been approved. We're also seeing, I would say, an unprecedented level of collaboration. Our companies are competitors in the marketplace, but they have approached their work on COVID in a very collaborative spirit. And that collaboration is happening between our large companies and small biotech, happening with government and academia as well. Just as one example, 2 of our member companies have partnered to develop a potential vaccine, and they're sharing their resources, their research, and their technology in order to try and be successful. One of our companies is also partnering with a small biotech company who has expertise in the development of novel mRNA vaccines. We've also seen platforms developed by industry like Transcelerate, which are helping companies quickly summarize patient summaries and patient level data along with real world evidence at a near instantaneous rate. Normally, this data is shared oftentimes a year later, but we're sharing that data and information on a real-time basis. And the hope in doing that is to reduce the timeline it takes to develop a product, save resources, and hopefully save lives as well. Companies are also currently in discussions with each other about manufacturing capacity. So once we have an effective treatment or a vaccine, pooling resources to manufacture to the levels necessary to broadly disseminate that vaccine and therapy. We also know, though, that no matter how fantastic and effective these vaccines may be, right now, unfortunately, we're reading and seeing a lot about hesitancy with regards to taking vaccines. We clearly need to do more to restore faith in the science behind the work that we're doing. And we're attempting to do this in a number of ways. Of course, while we are working quickly, we're not cutting corners in terms of our research. We are committed to ensuring the highest standards are upheld through our research, our clinical testing, and manufacturing. Several of our companies, I'm sure many of you saw recently, came together and pledged to only seek regulatory review after data from very rigorous, large clinical trials, including an expectation that we include diverse populations that we know have been hit particularly hard with COVID as part of those clinical trials. We've seen companies publish their clinical trial protocols to further the transparency in the review process as well. And after these vaccines are hopefully approved and on the market, the monitoring that our companies do doesn't stop. It continues in a very robust and vigorous way well after approval. Despite these efforts, we have work to do to build confidence in a vaccine, as I mentioned before. For example, recent polling that the Kaiser Family Foundation did suggested that nearly half of African Americans would not take a COVID-19 vaccine if it were approved today. It's critical that we all work together to ensure that your constituents feel confident in the science that we've laid out. And one way to build confidence is to start addressing the significant impact that COVID-19 has had on Black and Brown communities. Addressing the gaps that have been laid bare by the pandemic are critical, not just to future innovation, but also to addressing COVID. For our part, we've pushed our industry to have honest conversations and are seeking to make our industry more inclusive and lean in on the importance of addressing diversity in clinical trials. Just before Thanksgiving, my association, PHRMA, released first ever industry-wide clinical trial diversity principles. And these are a real crucial step as we strive towards greater health equity. The principles were formed with an understanding that we need to do more to build trust with Black and Brown communities and are really focused on four main areas. First is about enhancing education about the role that clinical trials play and doing that with the medical community as well as with patients. Second, it's about reducing barriers to clinical trial access through enrollment and retention practices, trial design, and eligibility criteria that are clinically and scientifically appropriate. Next, it's about using real-world data to enhance information on diverse populations beyond clinical trials. And last, enhancing the public-facing information about diversity and inclusion in clinical trial participation. Our industry is dedicated to earning the trust and addressing some of the systemic issues that prevent Black and Brown communities from enrolling in our clinical trials to ensure that those that want to participate can participate. And I would say, finally, we're working with government and insurers to ensure that when new treatments and vaccines for COVID are approved, they will be available and affordable for patients. Our companies have a long track record of pricing responsibly during pandemics, and we don't expect affordability to be a problem this time around. But this is something that we need to work on together. You've all proved this year that states indeed are on the front lines when it comes to getting things done, and we'd love to work with you to continue to build trust in the science. I would be remiss if I also did not say thank you to all of you. In addition to all of the help you gave us to keep our facilities online this year, so the crucial research and development that our companies do, not just on COVID, but on all of the therapies we make, that help was tremendous in ensuring that no patient is left with the unfortunate situation of not being able to access their medicine. But our industry would not have been able to work this year as fast were it not for the robust, competitive, and market-based innovation ecosystem that exists here in the US, and I would argue there is no comparator around the world in that regard. So I want to extend our thanks to everyone here today for your support of pro-competitive policies that have fostered our industry's ability to bring remarkable advancements in treatments and cures to patients when they need it most. In response to COVID-19, Americans have a renewed sense of unease as it relates to the quality and cost of their healthcare. Looking at a poll that was done just right before the election showed nearly 60% of voters headed to the polls and they were worried they wouldn't have adequate coverage needed in the case of a major medical event. There is an urgent need and desire for policies that ensure fairness, access, and affordability, but also that maintain healthcare choice and quality. Overall, we stand ready to help in that effort over the long term and are excited to work with policymakers and regulators to not just put COVID-19 behind us, but to advance policies that lower patient costs, increase access to healthcare, and sustain the robust innovation ecosystem that makes it possible to bring and develop new medicines for the patients and populations that need them the most. However, if we go down the wrong path, we could wipe out the critical innovation that is taking place today that has brought us vaccines and therapies to treat COVID and other conditions like cancer and Alzheimer's and diabetes. And we risk losing that innovation as well as hundreds of thousands of jobs across this country. We do agree that too often patients are paying too much for their medicines, but price setting proposals out there are not the answer. In fact, they harm patient access to critical medicines and destroy America's role as the global leader in innovation at a time when Americans and the world need biopharmaceutical innovation more than ever to beat this global pandemic. Price setting has been proposed by those who embrace socialized medicine would harm patient access and innovation. Nearly 90% of new medicines launched since 2011 are available here in the United States. And that's compared to just 50% of those medicines on average in other developed countries. Allowing governments to dictate what medicines are worth leads to worse outcomes for patients. Despite being a wealthy country, the UK's National Health Service has lower uptake of new medicines than in comparable countries, and cancer survival that resembles Eastern Europe. By contrast, for most cancers, the average 5-year survival in the US is among the highest in the world. Price setting also slows down critical research and development efforts. If you look back at 1986, biopharmaceutical R&D investment in Europe was 24% higher than in the US. Then European governments adopted things like reference pricing and other price setting policies. Today, Europe trails the United States by over 40%. We need to work together to strengthen our current market-based competitive system, an approach that is the best way to determine the value of medicine, keep prices down, and keep innovation from happening. Our goal should be lower cost and improved access to medicine and ensuring patients are getting the benefits. One important way to do that and to ensure that patients are benefiting from the rich negotiation that happens in the private sector is to ensure that those discounts and rebates that pharmaceutical companies negotiate with insurance companies find their way back into the pockets of patients who need them. This year, we saw legislation introduced in 13 states to shine a brighter light on where discounts and rebates are getting stuck in the system and help get them to the patients that need them. We want to work with you on common sense reforms like that benefit patients where it matters most, at the pharmacy counter. In closing, I just want to assure you that we are committed to doing our part to end the pandemic and helping patients afford their medicines over the long term. As we move forward, let's keep this momentum going and focus on helping patients in the right ways. I want to thank you again for your time and for having me here today, and best of luck with